the International Women's Alliance webinar on Women Against Neoliberalism. My name's Donna Denina, and I'm the Secretary General for the International Women's Alliance. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, where we will be talking about neoliberalism and kind of breaking that down, trying to understand what the system is and how the system has detrimental impacts to not just women, but people all over the world. A little bit about IWA, International Women's Alliance, is a global women's alliance of about 100 or so organizations globally. We are an anti-imperialist alliance, and we take up issues of women, particularly those that are the most impacted by issues of war, labor exploitation, and the system of neoliberalism, as we discussed earlier. Today, we'll focus on what it looks like to organize against economic exploitation, state repression, and forced migration. So we have a series of speakers today that will share their personal experiences. And then we'll also have a political situationer to kind of outline the current context that we're operating in today. Thank you all again for joining us. We will have a reactor at the end of all of our presentations to give her initial reaction to the information being shared and also give some concluding remarks. And then we will end the presentation today with various ways to get involved. We'll talk about the different calls to action, and we will end with a closing video. So hopefully you all will enjoy the information being shared and take this information with you and participate in any way that you can to join us in the fight against neoliberalism, join us in the fight to liberate women from the chains of oppression and exploitation. So with that, I would like to introduce Katie Comfort. She is currently our IWA US chapter coordinator. We are gearing up right now to hopefully launch the US chapter of IWA by next year. She's been part of the Global Secretariat since January of 2020. She got her start in organizing as a college student in Chicago as a member of Students for Justice in Palestine and through the Fight for 15 campaign. After moving home to Portland, Oregon, they got connected with the Portland Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines and became passionate about exposing the global impact of US military on vulnerable populations. They first learned about IWA at a conference in Toronto, which was held back in 2017. And they're really excited to be forging connections between US-based organizations to grow the anti-imperialist women's movement here and around the world. So with that, I'd like to introduce Katie, who will take us through a short presentation on neoliberalism.
Thanks so much, Donna. And hi, everyone who's here with us today. Like Donna said, I'll just be doing a quick intro on neoliberalism, kind of outlining where it came from historically, what it means for us today, and the impacts, especially on women. And then also how it's upheld, so we can start to see how that connects to our different speakers who are here today as well. Oh, 1 second. Let me get my screen pulled up. 1 moment, sorry. Are you seeing my screen?
No.
Okay, cool. That's very strange.
Let me know if you need support.
Okay, no, it's okay. I thought I had it all queued up, but it's all good. Do you see it now? You don't, huh? Donna, are you able to screen share the presentation? Yep. Okay.
Yep, for sure.
While Donna's pulling that up, the first bit is just going to look at the history of like where neoliberalism comes from. And so neoliberalism is a term that's really been around since like the 1970s is when it got popularized, but it didn't emerge out of nowhere. And so I think really understanding the historic context that it came out of is like very helpful, I think, as we're talking about these things, so we can see how it's connected to our economic system of capitalism and then also the system of imperialism. So capitalism being the system that really started in the 1800s, an economic system based on private ownership where employees trade work for wages, right? It's under capitalism that we really start to see gender exploitation take on new forms, where women are being exploited both through work and at home due to the growing like reliance on women to be the like bearer of the family, and to also support the like passing on of wealth through a family. Donna, you have a little pop-up. If you can hit got it, then I think we'll be able to see the screen more clearly. Yeah, and so capitalism, as it starts to expand, it starts to really exhaust the local markets that it has, and that leads into imperialism, which imperialism is a term popularized by Lenin in his writing on imperialism. And he talks about imperialism being the highest, yeah, Donna, we can still see the pop-up. He talks about imperialism being like the highest stage of capitalism or the most advanced stage. And that's because capitalism has like exhausted its local markets and then has to push itself internationally to gain more resources globally. So as imperialism starts to expand, it starts to lead to the influence of the division of the world, both economically, which countries are controlling the economics of other countries through colonialism, or today through like free trade agreements and different things, as well as through military engagement, right? So that's where we see the emergence of World War I and World War II, as well as a lot of other military conflicts regionally as well. Imperialism, though, also starts to kind of exhaust the resources. And so as these corporations are growing and growing and monopolies are becoming bigger and bigger, what's necessary is as imperialism starts to balloon is that it takes on new forms to really protect the profits of these monopoly businesses. And so that's where we get neoliberalism, is that the economic system shifts from being hyper-local under capitalism to hyper-international or mega international monopolies under imperialism, to then neoliberalism saying like, let's do everything we can as a government to protect the profits and the interests of corporations, but not the people. So it's this complete shift to where now our economic system is focusing on the profits of corporations and deprioritizing the needs of people. So today, the impact that has on women is women workers around the world are experiencing increased exploitation. Many women around the world are facing increased like landless issues. Yay, thanks, Donna, that's perfect. Landlessness, and then also the government stops meeting the needs of the people. So like in this country, as we'll hear from Esperanza, we're facing a major crisis, right? In terms of like access to healthcare, education, housing, food, and around the world, that's also exacerbated. So when we talk about neoliberalism, it's not a crisis that's just emerging now for the first time. It's a crisis that's really been building over the course of history, but especially since the inception of capitalism as a global system, and the development of imperialism as well. We can go to the next slide, Donna. So when we talk about neoliberalism, there are really 5 things that we want to focus on as like aspects of neoliberalism and the ways that governments are like prioritizing and prioritizing the profits and needs of corporations over the needs of the people. The first one is liberalization, which allows freedom of investment, goods and services to maximize profit. And what this does is it increases the precocity of work, or the precarity of work, especially in the informal economy. And globally, women are like really highly represented in the informal economy. I think in some countries or regions of the world, it's as high as 80% of women are, or 80% of people in the informal economy are women. And that's things like street vendors, people who own like small shops that maybe aren't like regulated by the government or aren't operating in a way that the government can track. But it also leads to increased unemployment and the like frequent moving of jobs, right? So in something that is often referred to as like the race to the bottom, we see a lot of women entering industries that are introduced and then taken away after a period of time. So it leads to an increase in the instability of the economy as well. But corporations are okay with it because it means they can keep moving their business from place to place to find where the profits are the highest. But one of the other aspects is privatization, which is the private ownership of public services. This is something that's really relevant here in the US as well. So if we think about like water crises, right, like Detroit, Flint, Michigan, Jackson, or even what happened in Texas with the major power outages and issues during the major like ice storm that they had, that's because of the like privatized power grid and privatized water and sewage departments in Texas. Or there's also deregulated environmental standards, which have had major impacts in like Ohio with the train derailing, and no like government oversight to regulate what the requirements are for ensuring that people there are safe or taken care of. But globally, the other impacts of that are decreased wages, disappearing benefits and services, and increasing costs of everyday goods without the increase of wages. So the impact that that has on women is that often women have to hold 2 or 3 jobs, or they're the one who have to supplement the family income in order to make up that gap that's created by the increased cost of things that people need every day. The third one, is deregulation, which is when laws are loosened for business practices to increase their profits. So things like protections at work, right? Or like safety regulations, those are really loosened. And the impact of that is the increase of the impact of environmental disasters, right? So deregulating mining practices leads to increases in landslides or pollution, especially in industries such as mining and oil extraction, which we see quite regularly. There's also an aspect with deregulation where when it's partnered with privatization, like the privatization of water or everyday resources, that's where we really see a lot of these like crises taking on a whole new layer, right? So the water crises that I mentioned earlier, those were exacerbated because there weren't government regulations in place to say like Flint, Michigan has to provide clean water for students and families. And so there wasn't actually a way for people to adequately advocate for themselves, even though I think all of us here can agree that water is a human right that we should be ensuring is accessible to people. But from a government perspective, there was no responsibility or nowhere to put responsibility on that because of how things had been privatized and deregulated legally. The fourth one is denationalization, which is where the dissolution of local production and leads to the domination of foreign capital. So we can think about it as like a country losing its agency or its control over its own resources in the benefit of a corporation having more access. So this is when corporations begin to own more land and control more industries than the actual people in a given country. And really what this leads to is land grabbing and forced migration. So there's actually, in free trade agreements, there's international agreements called investor state dispute settlements, where a corporation can sue a country, like an entire government, if a government regulation imposes a loss of profits. And this has happened dozens of times around the world, where countries in Europe, the United States have sued small countries for preventing like mining operations from carrying through or different things like that. And the other like impact that this has is it also leads to displacement because corporations have increased access to land. It leads to increased famine because the land is being monocropped or mined, and there's not the ability for local populations to develop their own agriculture. And all of these things are just exacerbated, especially by denationalization as well. And then the final thing that happens under neoliberalism is regressive taxation, which I think we're all too familiar with in this country, right? Where banks since 2008, we've seen get major bailouts anytime there's an economic crisis in capital. But then we can't even get student loan forgiveness in this country, or we get like 2 or 3 relief checks during a pandemic when corporations are being bailed out month after month by our own government. And so what regressive taxation is it's the severe debt of the majority of people through heavy taxes for services that we actually don't receive. So we start getting less and less services provided for us, even though our taxes are increasing on a regular basis. And this especially impacts poor and working class people in the global South, results in escalated poverty, landless, and an increase in precarious informal work. Because again, when the cost of living goes up, people have to make do, right? They have to find jobs, especially women have to find jobs wherever they can in order to make up that difference, which is quite difficult. And I think as what we've seen throughout history is that women are actually quite resourceful in making up that difference, but it shouldn't be something that we're forced to do or that is as common as it is globally. We can go ahead and look at the next slide. So as we're going through and talking about neoliberalism, we also want to understand, like, how does neoliberalism view women? And because women are more involved in the informal economy, it means that less of their income is being taxed or being collected to like support the profits of corporations. And so neoliberalism will often cite women as an untapped resource for economic growth within a neoliberal system, which we do want women to be contributing to society. We do want them to be advancing development and everything like that. But under a neoliberal system, the benefit of women being introduced into like the workforce doesn't benefit our communities, it benefits corporations. So it's quite terrifying. But there's really three ways that we've heard from our member organizations and in our own research as the International Women's Alliance that neoliberalism, seeing women this way, impacts women. The first is landlessness. So I think one thing that's important to remember as an alliance, most of our membership is actually based in the global South. And one of the biggest issues that women in the global South face is that they are living in underdeveloped countries that are very agriculturally based. And so land becomes a very critical issue. So it is something we try to focus on a lot as the International Women's Alliance. But what happens under neoliberalism is that the land is reclaimed by these corporations, either for agricultural processing zones, special economic zones for industry, or for mining projects. And so people who have lived on that land and farmed that land for their families and communities then are forced off or forced to farm and cultivate crops that are actually being sent overseas. And so that impacts their everyday livelihood as well. And so that forces women and their families to either move to cities, so there's internal forced migration, or they're forced to leave their country of origin completely and come to countries with more advanced economic systems like the US or parts of Europe to be domestic workers through like these global exchange programs that we see. One's pretty common in the Philippines, the Overseas Filipino Worker Program, which allows a lot of women to come to different countries as domestic workers, which is an industry that's also very deregulated within our global system. The second way that things are really, that neoliberalism really impacts women is through violence, and this manifests in a couple ways. One is when a company moves in and develops like a factory or some sort of processing zone, they're not developing infrastructure for people to live. So they're usually wiping out the community, people are migrating, and the people who move in to work there, they're not building roads or they're not building homes. They're not developing like what are community safety measures that we can instill. And so in places like Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, which is a site of a lot of manufacturing, especially since the North American Free Trade Agreement, since that was imposed, the increase of violence against women has just skyrocketed with like record-breaking femicides and disappearances of women as well. And the other impact of violence or ways that violence manifests is that militaries are called in to protect foreign investment in countries. So especially like in countries with high, like big mining projects, the military will show up to protect the mining project. So then when women are on the front lines of resisting this like corporate land grabbing, they're put in the crosshairs and the military protects the corporations rather than protecting, the military protects the corporations rather than protecting the people on the land who are being impacted by these land grabbing actions that are happening. And then the final impact on women under neoliberalism is that the industry that's developed is export oriented. So globally, we see a lot of women in industries that are oriented toward export, especially the garment industry, where women make up 90% of the workforce. And there's also really high exploitation because of that deregulation and no worker protections in the industry. And this is really where we see some of the biggest impacts of those 5 features of neoliberalism that we were looking at earlier, where women are just very often put in positions where they're working more than 80 or 90 hours a week. They're being paid less than $1 a day in some cases. And corporations don't have any accountability, or there's very few ways to really enforce those things or protections for workers. And so that's another aspect. We can move to the next slide. I just want to touch really quick. I know I'm running a bit low on time, but want to touch really quickly on how neoliberalism is upheld, because that's really one of the things we want to identify today is who are the targets, right? As the International Women's Alliance, as we're building our US chapter, what are the entities that we want to really focus on and target? And so there's a few different ways that neoliberalism is upheld. One is through public-private partnerships. And one example of that, which is when a government partners with a private institution to provide services to the people, right? But it's still privatized. And so the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation is one such place where these public-private partnerships are negotiated. APEC is a place where corporations and governments of the Asia-Pacific countries come together and negotiate new trade agreements, new trade deals, and really come up with new programs to try to advance profits for these corporations. Another way that that's facilitated is through free trade agreements like IPEF, which is a trade agreement that's being negotiated right now, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. And so with both of those, we really see governments working in collusion with corporations to figure out what policies are the best to pass in order to maximize profits. The other ones are when the government and private entities are completely separate, they're still protecting the interests of businesses. So these are just some examples of different departments within the US, the Department of Homeland Security, USAID, or like foreign aid that the US is sending out, the US military, the executive office, even the Department of Education are all entities within the United States itself that are upholding neoliberal policy and ensuring that these ideas are passed on and instilled and really protected. And then the final one is corporations themselves. So we'll be hearing later from Tina Brown, who's waging quite a strong campaign against Amazon, showing, and I think what is incredible about the campaign that Tina highlights is it shows how Amazon will put its employees in harm's way for the sake of increased profits, right? And Amazon is trying to do that all over the world, especially through programs like the international, through IPEF and these new free trade agreements, where it's really putting its own interests in the forefront and trying to say that it's for the advancement of people's progress, but really it's always to increase its own profits. And we can go to the last slide, I think, or the next slide. So I think as we're going through this, really thinking through what are the true solutions, right? Because neoliberalism isn't the solution. It's not what we need. And how do we make neoliberalism the clear target of our work together in whatever we're doing? How do we really root ourselves into creating change to create a system that works for us, rather than having us have to work for a system that's killing us? We can go to the next slide, Donna. Oh, the other way. Yeah, and so I think as we do this, what we're really trying to focus on as we build IWA US is that we're organizing for a better world, and we want to unite together to support our struggles and campaigns in all the different ways that we're approaching and targeting neoliberalism's impacts on women and our communities here in the US and around the world. That's what we're here to do as the International Women's Alliance, and what we aim to do with this webinar today is really highlight some different campaigns that are being waged around different issues, but that are all attacking neoliberalism and imperialism and capitalism from different angles so that we can really weaken it and still win that world that's worth fighting for, right? So with that, I'll give it back to you, Donna, and we can continue on. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Katie, for breaking that down. I think it's really important for us to understand this sort of like framework of neoliberalism and how it's impacting people around the world, particularly the most vulnerable, women in the Asia Pacific region in particular. And we'll kind of tie it to APEC in a minute. But I also wanted to mention that all of this webinar, the campaigns that we're waging is actually part of a new campaign that IWA launched. We just united on this as a political conference back in March. It's our campaign to fight for women's needs and to stop corporate greed. And so this is sort of a running series of educational webinars that we'll be doing under this campaign. And hopefully folks can join in and join us in the fight to wage the campaign to fight against these corporate monsters that are oppressing and repressing women here and around the world. So with that, I wanted to introduce our next speaker. She will give us a breakdown of what's going on today, currently in the United States, and give a US situationer. It's an honor to introduce Esperanza Fonseca, who is a union organizer, a writer, and member of the new anti-imperialist proletarian feminist organization known temporarily as the IRFC, which currently has 9 chapters across the US. She's currently based in California and has nearly a decade of experience as a worker and a community organizer. She got her start as a fellow with the Ziegler Young Religious Leaders Organizing Fellowship, where she organized faith leaders to fight alongside workers in Los Angeles. She later graduated from the Women's Policy Institute, where she won the Access to Safe Food Choices and Food Security Act of 2019, which created a statewide restaurant meals program that vastly increased access to hot and prepared food by CalFresh recipients who were homeless, elderly, or disabled. More recently, she appeared in and co-produced the docu-narrative film Sell by Date, directed by Tony Award-winning filmmaker Sarah Jones, where she focused on the connection between sexual exploitation and imperialism. Fonseca graduated from Whittier College with a degree in feminist studies and theology, and is currently completing a program in the geospatial technology and engineering, where she is researching the use of remote sensing in tracking environmental pollution. She maintains a blog, which everyone should check out, proletarianfeminist.medium.com, and writes on gender oppression, technology, and imperialism. Please join me in welcoming Esperanza.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Katie, for situating neoliberalism and imperialism and capitalism earlier. I apologize for the long bio, as I did not intend for all of that to be read, but very excited to be here with you and a big supporter of the International Women's Alliance. So I wanted to start out by just sharing a quote from the UN Secretary General, who this year released a report that said that gender equality is still 300 years away. And the reasons that he cited are primarily due to war and conflict, but also due to high rates of maternal mortality, girls being forced into early marriage, and girls being kidnapped and assaulted while attending school. It's worth noting, first of all, that in the United States, maternal mortality is among the highest of any countries that can be compared to the US in terms of its economic scale. At the same time, lawmakers are advocating for child marriage, for child labor, and we also see that violence against women and trans people is rising. And as many of you know, homicide is among the most common causes of death for pregnant women. Specifically, I'd like to return to the issue of maternal mortality, where it's actually rising. And a lot of people do not realize this. In 2020, 23.8 out of 100,000 births were, victims of maternal mortality. That rose from 23.8 to 32.9 in just 1 year in 2021. And of course, right, gendered violence is not just gendered, but it's also racialized and classed. And the majority of the victims of maternal mortality were non-white women, and in particular, Black women. Things not mentioned, of course, in this report were state violence, police repression, deportations, incarceration, forced prostitution, and other things like that. And so I want to ask, when women die as a result of being incarcerated, for being migrants, or as a result of maternal mortality, or as a result of police violence, what do we call these deaths? Well, there's one word that I would like to use, which unfortunately is not very common in the United States, and that word is femicide, or the murder of women because they are women. According to one writer talking about femicide for the Chicago Policy Review, of all femicide cases in the high-income world, 70% are committed in the United States. And yet a Pew Research Center survey found that more than half of Americans think sexism is over. More than 70% of all femicides in countries with a similar economic level as the US are experienced in the United States. Of course, despite these high rates of femicide in the US, femicide is still not even legally defined as a crime. Whereas women activists across Latin America have forced their governments, over 17 Latin American countries in particular, to pass explicit laws against femicide, the majority of the US still does not even know what that word means, much less the extent of the problem or who it impacts. In fact, the word femicide is used so little that even in my notes for this webinar, femicide itself is highlighted with a red dotted line because the spell checker doesn't even recognize it as a real word. With such high rates of femicide and gender-based violence against women and trans people, we have to wonder exactly what the priorities of our so-called leaders, our elected officials, are. Well, if you were to look at a pie chart of discretionary government spending, over half of the circle would be filled by military spending. Every year, both political parties and even the so-called progressive wing of the Democrat Party vote to increase military spending, which they call defense. Of course, defense is really just a code word for advancing wars of aggression. We're told that we're in the midst of a budget crisis, and rather than cutting the egregious amount of money spent on defense, which as we know is really an offense, we're told that instead we have to cut vital programs like SNAP, which I used to be a recipient of, which is more commonly known as food stamps and provides food assistance to literally prevent people from dying of hunger. In a country like the US, where 63% of all adult SNAP recipients are women, where 34% of adult recipients are women of color, 18% are women with disabilities, and 44% are actually children, it's impossible to not see the cuts to these programs as a vicious and intentional attack on working women and on our children. Of course, the deaths of the women that result from these government policies are not accidental, and nor are they blameless. The fault for their deaths and suffering lies squarely on the US state and the class of people that that state serves. These deaths are indeed femicide and should be understood as that. It's also important to remember, however, that femicide resulting from the policies of the US do not only affect women in the US, they also affect women and trans people abroad as well. In particular, I'm reminded of a case that had a very deep effect on me when I first heard about it, namely Jennifer Lauda, who was a transgender woman who was killed in the Philippines by US Marine Joseph Pemberton. Claiming trans panic and with the backing of the imperialist US state, Pemberton was pardoned and released in 2020 by Duterte and his imperialist dependent regime. It's worth noting, of course, that this problem, namely of violence enacted against women, against trans people by imperialist US soldiers, is not going to end anytime soon. In an attempt to advance an inter-imperialist rivalry against China, the US has recently introduced 4 new military bases that it can now access in the Philippines: 3 on Luzon, close to Taiwan, and 1 in the Palawan province, close to the South China Sea. This brings the total number of US military bases in the Philippines to 9. So let's go back to the statement that the UN Secretary General made about gender equality and how it cannot be realized under current conditions, mostly due, according to him and the report they released, to war and conflict. In a world dominated by imperialism, where the imperialist countries are fighting to divide the world into territories so that they can control the majority of land and resources, and in a world where these imperialist countries are consistently investing money into military programs in order to shut down any genuine democratic movement of the people fighting for national liberation, fighting for a better world, how can we ever expect war to actually end? What the UN will not tell you is that capitalism, when it's able to fully develop, always develops into monopoly capitalism, where it reaches its final stage of imperialism. And those nations that are not able to fully develop as a direct result of being oppressed, looted, and exploited by imperialist nations by the US are stuck in a semi-feudal state where patriarchal relations and patriarchal violence are maintained. And this becomes a deadly concoction for women in oppressed nations who are oppressed due to their class, their sex, and the nation in which they belong to. It's no secret that under neoliberalism, our lives have become far less secure and more precarious. As someone who organizes workers, from retail workers to resident physicians, I've seen the way that their hours have been cut, that their jobs have become less secure, and the effect that that has on them. Oftentimes, for many working women, this leads them into the underground economy, whether different forms of the sex industry or other types of industries in the underground economy. They are not only forced into a more dangerous situation to make ends meet, but then they are increasingly surveilled, criminalized, incarcerated, and brutalized because of it. And yet, in this situation, we are told that these neoliberal policies are actually a means for women to to access greater freedom. If you look up, free trade agreements and women on, Google, you will literally find all of this propaganda about how it actually improves the lives of women internationally and at home. And yet you look at the numbers of femicide, of maternal mortality. You look at the cutting of social programs that literally feed people and keep them from dying of hunger. And you have to wonder whose interests are served by claiming that these neoliberal policies, by claiming that industry deregulation, et cetera, actually benefits women. Of course, we know that this freedom is not ours. It's the freedom for corporations to exploit workers, to loot oppressed nations, and yet it's framed as our freedom, despite us knowing that it's really theirs. And then I wonder too, especially looking at current headlines, in the midst of this crisis, what exactly is the priority of the US media? Well, many of you might recall the recent, media frenzy around the Titan submersible. Of course, you might also know that during that same time, a boat carrying around 750 migrants capsized off the coast of Greece. And there's many reports that this catastrophe was likely caused to the policies and the actions of the Greek Coast Guard. It's worth noting that, Greece has been embroiled for years now in a struggle against, its policies of neoliberalism and austerity, and more recently has actually enacted vicious anti-migrant laws, including policies that are called pushbacks, where they literally push rescued refugees, many of them women, back out to sea. In my opinion, these deaths also should not be considered accidental. The deaths of, for example, the pregnant women off the coast of Greece in the boat that capsized should also be considered femicide. And we should understand the gender, national, racial, and class dynamics of those deaths. So what is the solution, right? Or where do we go from here? Well, in my opinion, I'd like to share a little bit of my experience before wrapping up. As you heard in my bio, I used to be very involved in movements aimed at policy reform. As a former SNAP recipient working to expand SNAP for people. And while those policies were absolutely, beneficial, I also question how much simply attempting to work with our elected officials within the limitations that they impose on us, how much of an effect that will actually have. Given the violence unleashed on women, unleashed on trans people, on people oppressed due to their race and their nation, on working people who are suffering under the boot of US imperialist domination, we really have to ask ourselves if we truly believe it's possible for them to lay down their arms, stop brutalizing us, forfeit their wealth, and allow us, the people, to build a society based on equity and justice. In my opinion, such a naive vision is not possible. What we need now is not the idea of this Gandhian ethos of pacifism and nonviolence and these things. What I believe is that we need to get serious about organizing, building a militant front of oppressed people who are willing to give it all they've got and really fight. And I believe that that fight is what is needed now more than ever. And so in closing, the current situation that we are in under neoliberalism, under US imperialism, has its start long ago. Women's oppression is the oldest extra class oppression. When slavery was first developed in ancient society, it was developed by first testing its techniques on women, using physical terror and coercion, according to one historian. Those techniques were the essential ingredients for turning free persons into slaves. And for enslaved women, such physical terror and coercion took the form of rape. And that legacy of sexual violence continues today, albeit under different forms, under neoliberalism and imperialism. And so to end femicide, to end sexual violence, to end women's oppression, we have to end it at its root, which means ending neoliberalism, ending imperialism, and ending capitalism.
Thank you so much, Esperanza. That was a very thorough explanation of what's happening currently in the world, and very sharp analysis connecting neoliberalism and imperialism as it impacts women around the world, and even kind of linking it back historically to the roots of women's oppression. So thank you so much. Up next, we have a speaker. Speaking of, the US military budget, right, being the biggest portion of the pie, because of its goal and aim to really control the majority of the world's resources, and trying to sustain desperately its position as the #1 world superpower. And the only way it can really do that is to repress people, take over its natural resources, and to wage wars of aggression. And so our next speaker, Zoe Reagan, who represents Resist US-Led War, the Seattle chapter, and is also representing a newly formed coalition, the Pacific Northwest People Over Profit Coalition, which is right now building up opposition to the Asia Pacific Economic Forum, which will be having its meetings here in Seattle pretty soon. Zoe is a graduate student whose research and teaching focuses on the physical basis for global climate and climate change. She's also an anti-imperialist feminist and an organizer with Resist. She's this local organization working to resist US-led wars of aggression and build just peace. She sees her organizing as a key way to work towards combating the root cause of both gendered oppression and climate crisis. Please join me in welcoming Zoe Reagan.
Hi, thanks so much, Donna, for that introduction. I'm Zoe, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about free trade agreements in particular, and then also kind of orient that in like, how does this global economic system, the way that it's propped up, serve to oppress people of different genders, and also how is war and militarism used as a tool for that oppression. So I just want to start out with a quote from the from APEC itself, which is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, which is this group of 21 different member economies that is coming up with a new free trade agreement currently this year. That's what the Pacific Northwest People Over Profit Coalition is organizing against. And just to kind of highlight the way in which these different member economies, as they call themselves, think about women. They say that evidence from both developed and developing economies has shown that increased participation of women will generate faster and more equitable income growth, create greater business opportunities, and enhance competitiveness for firms and economies by facilitating innovative thinking and fuller use of a significant resource. So in their own words, women are seen as an untapped resource. And in many of their other writings, they say things like, in this last year alone, our different member economies have missed out on upwards of like $94 billion in the APEC region because women are not being included fully in the digital economy. So this is a really naked exposure of the way that the people who are able to be setting these different agreements and setting our global economy think about workers, but also in particular, workers who are not men. And so just to talk a little bit more about what are free trade agreements and what do I mean when I say that term, and what is this like Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum organizing. Free trade agreements are just this is just a broad umbrella term that refers to ways to ensure different nations are dependent on the global economy. And the way that they do that is by a whole bunch of different tools, and I'll go through a few of them, but their general goals are to reduce labor and environmental regulations, to reduce barriers to trade so corporations can operate more effectively across multiple different nations, by lowering tariffs or taxes on goods and services that move across borders. And then also by offering loans to developing nations with lots of strings attached. So when we think about like free trade and what does this really mean, the question that I'm always stuck with is, who is this free for? It's not allowing people to move freely across borders whatsoever, but it is really allowing for capital to flow easily, for finance to flow easily, for goods and services, for goods in particular, for resources that these large global corporations use. Katie and Esperanza gave us really nice overviews of what is imperialism and how come capitalism always develops into this stage of imperialism. And these free trade agreements, or just basically agreements made by the corporate ruling elites, facilitate ease for corporations to operate in multiple different nations. And so you might imagine that like the people who live in these different nations would be opposed to this because nobody wants for corporations to own their land. People would like to have national sovereignty. So often when there is uprising, and there always is resistance, right? We know that just because corporations and the ruling class elite are able to create the systems and structures that we're living under, people are always fighting back as well. So earlier, Katie mentioned investor-state settlement disputes. So at this point, I just want to transition into thinking a little bit about examples of free trade and then ways in which they're kind of propping up gendered oppression. And so basically, I want to talk a little bit about investor-state settlement disputes. Many of us who live here in the US have probably heard of both the Keystone Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL pipeline and the Dakota Access Pipeline. These are natural gas and oil, these are oil tar sands pipelines that bring crude oil from the tar sands in Alberta across the border into America, into the US. And many of the people who are resisting this, these are women, and in particular, these are Indigenous women. So on the front lines already, we see people of color and people of oppressed genders who are fighting back for defending the land, defending the water, because these pipelines are very leaky, and so they can get into the water supply in the North and South Dakotas in particular. And what happens is that these corporations come in, they bring workers into the region, and there's a huge problem in the US with missing and murdered Indigenous women. And the workers who are, coming to work on these pipelines are there as working class people, but also, part of this exploitative system. And we know that, even if we recognize that the root cause of gender depression is in the war and militarism, which is spurred by capitalism and the economic system that we're living under, patriarchy is a spur of that as well, right? So these workers, primarily men, come and work in this area building the pipeline, and there are many Indigenous women who report being able to overhear workers talking about, like, the best part of coming to the Dakotas to work is having access to Indigenous women. And so that's really disgusting, and it's clearly exploitative, and it's rooted in this economy that we're living in. And so to get into the investor-state settlement dispute part of this all, when activists were able to slow and halt the building of this pipeline, TC Energy, the company behind building the Keystone Pipeline, was able to sue the government of the United States because under NAFTA, which is a free trade agreement that involves the US, Mexico, and Canada, TC Energy was able to sue the US government for about $15 million of loss in profit. And so these free trade agreements have settlement, or have ways for corporations to protect their profit. And we know this profit incentive that capitalism is organized for, right? In order to be a successful corporation under capitalism, you have to continuously produce a profit for your shareholders. Otherwise, your company will fail. And that means that you have to grow year after year. And so you have to be able to protect this profit. And under these free trade agreements, you have this mechanism, if you're a corporation, in order to protect your profit and sue the state. And so we see in this example that class exploitation is violent. So if we have inadequate access to food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, basic needs, that in and of itself is inherently violent. But when we add that there's militarism from these oppressive nations, that is used to weaken the labor movements or to weaken the environmental movements in a region. I just want to ask, like, who here has ever heard of a military or a police force coming in to protect the protesters who are protecting the land or protecting the water? They're always here to protect the corporate interests, right? And so I also want to talk about a different example, which is a little bit more uplifting. There is a construction company called Bechtel, and they were able to buy up basically, sorry, let me back up. So there's another kind of tool under this umbrella of free trade agreements called structural adjustment programs. So these are the loans that I was talking about earlier, where like an international financial institution like the World Bank will give a country a loan, but then say, in order to receive this money, you have to develop in a certain way. And so an aspect of a loan that was granted to the country of Bolivia from the World Bank was to say that this construction company, Bechtel, got access to the water in Bolivia. So they got to access and manage pretty much over 50% of the water in Bolivia. But after years and years of mass protests and collective action, the people were able to halt this. And Bechtel was receiving so much kind of backlash from people and from women in particular who were protesting this, that they then filed their own investor state settlement dispute with the World Bank, saying that their profits were being threatened. And then through the work of these activists, in particular oppressed genders, people of oppressed genders, Bechtel actually lost this lawsuit. And this was the first example. This was the first example of a corporation losing this kind of settlement dispute. So trade agreements in general are just used to make it easier for corporations to access cheap resources like oil and gas and mining for, I'm getting close to time, sorry. And also to be able to offshore anyway, yeah, so this is these are like two large examples of different ways in which free trade agreements are used to make it so that corporations can protect their interests and make it so that corporations can operate across borders. And so one way to sort of get involved and start thinking about this is to think a little bit about how to, I'm sorry, I got a little sidetracked here, but yeah, so free trade agreements in general lower barriers to trade, but do not make it easier for people to have a good livelihood. And so I will stop here because I'm getting a little flustered, but anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll pass it back to our MCs.
Thanks, Zoe. No worries. It was a lot of great information, and I'm sure you had a lot more to share. I know that we're running a little bit over time, but we can ensure that if folks have questions, they can definitely ask during the Q&A portion. So thank you so much for talking about the role of how free trade can impose more violence on women, and the role that the state plays in that, pretty much allowing for free flow of capital and the free flow of the natural resources that are aggressively extracted from these companies that then kind of like has these detrimental impacts to the environment, to the people, while people are barred from freely, moving through borders. So we heard a little bit about the role that free trade plays, and something I did want to also link this to is that a way that this is further perpetuated to ensure that these sort of like neoliberal policies are upheld sometimes is through the enforcement of war and wars of aggression. And we definitely know and understand that imperialism means war, and women are usually caught in the crossfires of war as victims in the war itself, or victims of sexual violence, and rape used as a tool of war to repress and suppress women and entire communities, right? When we're talking about entire nations submitting themselves to these free trade agreements, usually war is a way to ensure that submission. So we want to kind of transition now into what does this mean for the everyday worker, right? And what do workers experience? And so earlier, Katie brought up the company, right? The conglomerate Amazon, which is also very much involved in the APEC meetings that are happening. Amazon is one of the largest distributor of goods, but it's also a company that's more and more engaging in technology, and particularly surveillance technology. And that sort of tied into the whole sort of web of where technology is driving us towards now. And so we have our next speaker, Tina Brown, who is an advocate and speaker on workplace injustice. Tina will always advocate for the working class people who are constantly put in difficult positions on a daily basis. Tina once was told we all have choices in life, but this is no longer a choice for her. This is a duty. Since January 8, 2021, Tina made a promise to her late sister, Pushan Brown, that she will always advocate for her and others that are continuously placed in harm's way by employers only looking to meet the daily quotas and build their companies off of the backs of the working class people who are just trying to make a living to feed their families. Tina's sister, Pushan, was an Amazon warehouse worker who died in her sleep in January 2021 after experiencing a headache that day. Pushan was assigned by Amazon to do COVID testing without appropriate PPE or hazard pay. And to this day, the family has been unable to afford an autopsy to verify the cause of her death. And so a lot of questions are being raised towards Amazon, and Amazon is completely negating any responsibility in this. And so there's an active campaign to seek justice for Pushan. So please join me in welcoming Tina Brown.
Hi, everyone. How is everyone doing today? Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for having me, especially Gabriella. I really appreciate it. I wanted to just start off and tell you guys a little bit about my sister, Pushan. We actually just did a rally at Jeff Bezos' house yesterday in the justice to support Pushan Brown, the movement. And I had announced for the first time, which I'm going to get into a little bit later, about a bill that's coming out. I'm proposing a bill to Congress in reference to workers, corporations, and having to do with workers who are put in positions that they have no business being put in, going to work. So I'll just tell everyone a bit about my sister. My sister was Pushan Brown. She was my baby sister. She was a mother. She was a loving mother. She was the best sister. She was the aunt. And she was my mama's baby. She was the baby of the family. Me and my sister both started off working for Amazon. I actually got her the job. We started off as drivers in 2018. And I'll say this too, because I just realized this. I was called last week when we talk about this company, Amazon, and we talk about the working women, and we also talk about just working people in the company. It's so crazy that I say this now, and it's because I was just contacted a couple weeks ago with a letter and an email stating that they settled class action lawsuit. I don't know if anyone knows this, but We start off as drivers, and I remember it was the hardest job. Amazon is the hardest job I've ever had in my life. The hardest job I ever had in my life. We were driving, and I was driving in the Northern Virginia area, and I remember one time I did a route, and the route took me to damn Delaware. And if anyone knows, in the DMV area, Delaware is about an hour and 45 minutes from DC. What was I doing in Delaware? But this was the route that I was put on. And I called into them, and they said, well, just don't worry about it. Do the route, we'll pay you extra. We actually got notification in the mail that they settled the class action lawsuit because Amazon had 400,000 employees, drivers that was working for the company, and they were stealing our money. We weren't getting tips. So we would be working and dropping off packages, and the customers had an option to give us tips. We never got any tips. And this is so crazy. And of course, Pooh died in January 2021. She didn't even get to see this, is because we kept speaking and talking to each other like, hey, did you get any tips? We're not getting any tips. Like, we didn't get any tips. We worked for this company. We were drivers for about a year, and they stole our money. We never got any tips. And Amazon just did a settlement last January. They settled, I believe it was $117 million lawsuit. They had 400,000 employees that they were stealing their money. They were stealing their tips. So it's crazy. I didn't get to discuss this at the last conference because I didn't know yet. I just got notified in the mail like 3 weeks ago that they had a settlement, and they wanted to send a check for people who used to work for Amazon. So that is another thing that I will say, that this company will use you, manipulate you, and take advantage. Moving back to my sister's story. My sister started working in the warehouse. We started working in the warehouse about 2019 in the DDC3 location warehouse. And of course, my sister started off as a sorter. She did every shift in the warehouse. She did the pick shift first, then she was a sorter. She did the belt. She did every shift in the warehouse. In 2020, of course, March 13th, 2020, the world shut down. Amazon was still up. They still had their doors open. People were still going to work. We still had to work. We still had to work. A lot of people couldn't figure out what was going on with their unemployment, etc. We were still working. My sister was assigned to the safety COVID department in June of 2020. I want to say in late April, I'm not quite sure, but Jeff Bezos announced that he was going to be opening up his own COVID testing facility. And of course, everybody remembers 2020. People had to wait in line hours. People were waiting in line, going to different cities, different states to get COVID tests. People were waiting in line 8-12 hours to get COVID tests. No one had a COVID test. So Jeff Bezos announced in 2020 that he was opening up his own COVID testing center inside the warehouse. Of course, we were working there at the time, doing our job as package handlers. We thought that there were going to be nurses and doctors coming in to give us drivers and the unemployed COVID testing. Never in a million years would I have thought, nobody thought, that Jeff Bezos was going to allow other Amazon employees who were just standard. And when I say standard, they came there to be sorters, pickers, package handlers, drivers, be COVID testers. My sister was trained by another employee to stick Q-tip swab of other Amazon employees' nose and test them for COVID. My sister did not have proper PPE. None of us did. She had no proper PPE, no protective gear, no goggles, no gown. It was no plexiglass. They were testing inside the warehouse, right by the cafeteria. Late October, I want to say November, my sister started COVID testing. The COVID tests, I guess, had came in. I guess he was waiting on the shipment. It was hard in 2020, so I don't know what delayed it, but the COVID tests came in. She started COVID testing, I want to say around late October, November, probably November. Keep in mind, my sister was COVID testing in the middle of a pandemic. There was no vaccine out. The first vaccine didn't come out, I believe, until December 14th. My sister had no medical training. She was not a nurse. She was not a doctor. She had a degree in human resources. She was not certified or qualified to be sticking anything up anyone's nose. And I want to say my sister sent several, over 20 emails, over 20 text messages to management, HR, Seattle, headquarters, telling them that the warehouse was not in safe conditions. Not only that, people were testing positive and still coming in, fevers going through side doors. Just keep working, just stay on top of it, just keep working. The week my sister died, she was not feeling well. For about 3 days, she wasn't feeling well. And I told her, I said, you need to go home. I said, you need to go home. You need to go to the doctors. No, I don't have any PTO. And that's another thing. I'm going to get into that. PTO, of course, is personal time off. She didn't have any PTO, so she couldn't take off. So my sister was told that Thursday that she was off on Friday by the management, and that she could go to the doctors then. That Thursday, my sister went home. She left her shift. She worked from Sunday to Thursday at the COVID testing department, COVID testing area in Amazon. She went home that Thursday, and that Friday morning she didn't wake up. My sister COVID tests anywhere from 6 people a day to 50 people a day. My sister COVID tests workers, drivers, and when I say Amazon, I'm talking about Amazon Prime, Amazon Fresh. They are several different companies in a warehouse that work for Amazon. So they are independent contractors. So like you have, like I said, I don't want to name any names because I'm in litigation, but you have several different companies that are contracted by Amazon. My sister tested workers, drivers, the 18-wheeler truck. My sister COVID tested everyone in that facility. And she did not have proper PPE. She wasn't a nurse or doctor. She wasn't a medical profession. She had no training. And not only that, she was not certified or qualified to be doing anything in the middle of a pandemic. No one in that warehouse was. Jeff Bezos decided that he wanted to save money. And instead of paying nurses and doctors to come in and contract them, or even setting up a trailer outside, he decided to save money and have other Amazon employees COVID testing each other. And that Friday, my sister did not wake up out of her sleep. I called them to let them know that my sister had passed. This is how unorganized and disorganized and how these people don't care. They called on Sunday to see why my sister was not at work. She never missed a day before. Why she was not at work. I said, I called to HR and told you that my sister passed. It wasn't until the media and organizations got involved that they called and said that they are very sorry. And they offered me, my niece, and my mother 2 weeks of counseling. And this is what I want to say about this. We're dealing with $1 trillion company, who had regular employees. And when I say regular, people that are not medical professions and they're illegally COVID testing. Not to mention this company has, I don't know how many lawsuits right now. And I just told you guys that I just received word that I'll be getting a check in the mail because when we were drivers, they were stealing our tips. They stole from over 400,000 employees. This is another example of a corporation taking advantage of regular people. People are going to work, and people should be able to come home while they go to work. They should feel safe at work. So that's why I announced yesterday, and I'm going to tell you guys, I'm proposing a bill for Congress, the Pushan Brown bill. This is to protect employees, regular people who go to work and come home, and not only that, for safety. It's every single day somebody's going to wake up tomorrow, and an employer is going to put an employee in a position to do something that they have no business doing. They're not certified, qualified to do, just to save money. It happens every single day. If Jeff Bezos would have hired nurses and doctors, my sister still would have been here. Employees and corporations get away with this all the time, and it's not okay. And I'm proposing a bill to Congress to stop this, because when people go home, they're single mothers, they're single fathers. There are people, working people, who are working out here for a little bit of money, who are giving that job their all. And they go home, they go to work, they should be able to come back home. They should feel safe at work. So I'm proposing a bill, and I will keep everybody posted and updated on it, and make sure we get some signatures signed. But I'm proposing a bill to Congress. It's going to be called the Pushan Brown bill, because there could never be another Pushan Brown. And it could never, ever happen. This could never, ever happen again. Could never, ever happen. So I'm going to keep everybody posted on that. But I just want to make sure that everyone understands that corporations like this in America, they get away with this all the time. It happens every single day. I'm in a fight right now for my sister's life, and she's no longer here. I am going to get justice for my sister, and I appreciate everyone for supporting me and supporting my sister. Please continue to post and share my sister's story to get us justice. But as long as I have a breath in my body, I know that I'm going to get justice. I know that I'm going to get justice for my sister. And I want to thank you guys so much. Thank you for inviting me. Like I said, I will always come on and speak. I will always advocate for the working person. It means the world. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. It's always very powerful to hear you speak and to share about what happened to your sister, and also very aggravating and angering and frustrating to hear about the acts of these large corporations like Amazon that really don't care about anything except the bottom line, and will do anything, right, to exploit the workers and putting them in harm's way, even if it's at the cost of their lives. If we could just take a moment, if folks feel comfortable to unmute, if you could just repeat after me, justice for Pushan Brown.
Justice for
Justice for
Pushan Brown.
Justice for Pushan Brown.
Pushan Brown.
Justice for Pushan Brown.
Pushan
Pushan Brown.
Brown.
Thank you so much,
you.
and
Thank
good
you.
luck with the bill. Please send us information so that we can also support you in your
Absolutely.
advocacy work.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we heard about one story of a worker working for Amazon, and we now want to share the story of the many different migrants that are also forced to leave their homelands because of these different neoliberal policies, and often coming over to their host country like the United States, where they're faced with nothing but discrimination and repressive policies. And so I would love to share with you all the story of Alma Bowman. Alma is a 55-year-old Filipina. I don't know if you're still 55, who was detained by ICE, right? Immigration Enforcement, Immigration Customs and Enforcement. And she was detained for about 3 years. And during that time, while she was incarcerated, she experienced medical negligence by the Irwin County Detention Center that gained international attention. She currently has an active deportation order, despite the fact that she held legal residency status prior to ICE detainment. Alma is actually, she was born in the Philippines to a Filipina mother and an American US father. Although she's not in ICE detention now, the prison walls haven't vanished. Without status, Alma is unable to participate in society in ways that are imperative for anyone's survival. She can't apply for health insurance. She can't have a driver's license. She can't work without paying an annual fee for a worker's permit. And she experiences several medical conditions that require consistent refills on her medication. The detention does not end once a person leaves an ICE facility. So I'd like to welcome Alma to share more of her story.
Hello, everyone. I'm 56, but I will forever say I'm 55. But my name is Alma Bowman, and I was detained by ICE from August 2017 to December 2020. I was detained at the Irwin County Detention Center, where Dr. Amin was performing inhumane procedures by removing female reproductive organs without knowledge or consent from the detainees. These detainees go in and see him, and they will tell them that they will be receiving a certain procedure, but they end up having a hysterectomy for some odd reason, and they don't find out until they've gone back to like to the regular nurse at the detention center, and they asked and said, hey, how come, I have these 3 holes in my belly that's supposed to be something else, that, and then they'll tell them, well, you had a hysterectomy, and that's how it goes. Because they didn't care, and I don't know who is paying for all this as far as ICE, our medical bills, so the detainees. I did go to one gynecologist that said that it was the veterans that are paying for all our medical bills, which I don't know. But I did have an encounter with Dr. Amin myself, and I did question his knowledge of being a doctor, and which led into an argument. And then I end up, he refuses to see me again, so I ended up seeing another doctor. And but a lot of these women, some of them have been deported, but when the case was still active, they were brought back to the US to be witnesses, or to show victims of the Dr. Amin case. Now, there are other things that detention center that have problems with, is as far as a lot of the women there does not speak English or speak very little English. And so they're afraid to speak out. And a lot of detention centers that I've been in, and I've been, of course, the one in Georgia, I've been to the one in Texas and Arizona, and they do not have bilingual staff members, nor do they carry a little interpreter box. So, like if I wouldn't be able to speak English, that, they could understand what I was saying, especially when it comes to health problems. And, but that's one of the problems with ICE, is that, hey, the men, when it comes to the men's part, they'll speak out no matter what. But the women, they're scared, and not being able to let people know how they're feeling or what they need even scares you more, because that'll scare me. And I feel like that ICE, if they are wanting to detain people, they need to be able to have somebody who can communicate with that person, no matter what country. So during those times, I've met a lot of the women in a lot of different countries, and some Spain, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, places like that. And they have all been nice, and some of them are there for just petty things. But just because they do not have status, they get taken away from their families. And some of them I've had seen, like they were taken away while they were working, and their children was at daycare, and they had no other families in the United States. So, this mother is so worried that what's going to happen to her children while she's being detained, so ICE just needs to go away. It just tearing families apart. And it's all just, to me, it seems like it's all money thing. I guess everything government-wise is money thing. If you got the money, they got the time. But I stay in touch still with some of these people, and through Facebook, in fact. But there are a few that, sometime had lingered off, and I don't know what they're doing now, or if they ever got deported, because most of them was in the same situation as I was, still under deportation order. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to, I get nervous with things. Since my release, December 20th, I've been reporting to ICE every month. But prior to that, it was was it every 3 months? Every 3 months until our Washington trip, where my kids had gone to talk to the consulate's office, and come to find out that they never processed my application for my travel documents, which is needed for them to deport me. But according to the people that they talked to, that it wouldn't, hey, as long as I send them the money, they're gonna get the travel documents done. So, but the proof, the kids took pictures of where they signed in and their pictures of the consulate emblem and all. And I took that to the ICE office when I reported, and they said that, okay, we'll see you in a year. So that's one plus thing that's going on with this, but still, there's still that coming back in a year, which, you never know what they're going to say. And I mean, up to this point, even though that I'm, like you said, I'm home with my children, I'm still worried about, hey, a knock on the door. You never know when they can come in and get you. I mean, but yeah, it's been excuse me, but hell, even though I am home. Now, to me, it seems like that immigrants, they pay the US for us to stay here in forms of green cards. Okay, they should be able to treat us a little bit better. We all are human beings. I mean, hey, there are American citizens who committed crimes, murder, and they get away with it. We immigrants, even if you have green cards, do pitiful things, pitiful little things. Misdemeanor, according to the state, is misdemeanor, but with federal, ICE has got their own laws. What one would see as a felony, aggravated felony, and not an aggravated felony, ICE would see as an aggravated felony, and a lot of times when you go to court, they do not specifically say that, hey, if you are not an immigrant, if you are an immigrant or, a green card holder or whatever, but, the sentencing part will make a big difference as far as what your situation would be against ICE. Because with ICE, you got to be sentenced 99 days or less for it to be not aggravated. Once you're for over 100 and over, if you've been sentenced that long, you're aggravated and can be deported at any times. So I just want to let everybody know that, for one thing, even though you pay for your green card, it does say permanent on it, but the US does not see it as permanent. You're permanent. Even though I myself, I just renewed my green card. I just paid for them to renew my green card, and then 6 months later, they come and take me. So why is USCIS renewing my green card and ICE is taking me if USCIS is over ICE? So yeah, it's just the government, sir, all messed up. I just want to be able to drive. I want to be able to try to get a job so I can help my family, help myself. I'm doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that just to earn some, money for my medication without having to ask for my children's help, because hey, I'm already bumming off of them. So, but, I love them and I love you all. And I'm so glad to have my extended family. And yeah, I love you guys. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Angelica Lim. This voice is because I was at a rally for nurses who were striking, which I think is great, but also sorry if this bothers you. I'm with the Justice for Alma Bowman campaign by way of Gabriela USA. We also have the International Women's Alliance who've signed on, Migrante USA, EMA USA. And it's just, I just want y'all, if you've never met Alma, I just want y'all to know that Alma is amazing, because Alma, we've been building with Alma and the Justice for Alma Bowman campaign for a few years now. And the fight that she and her family continue to put in to not only expose what she witnessed in the Irwin Detention County ICE Detention Center is brave enough as it is. But what she also really exposes is the impact of neoliberal policies that have not only an impact on migrants who are detained in detention center, but also for undocumented folks in our country after post-detention. The psychological warfare that is put on people who are, Alma, you said the word, who are on notice, right? I think, you know, the profound effects that people have already been talking about with forced migration across the world that has been caused by the US in particular, and why people have to be forced to migrate, have a deep impact on how we see migrants in the United States. Through what Katie was talking about, deregulation, privatization, trade liberalization, you see that even though the US wants immigrants and migrants to work these jobs to ensure investment and also just productivity, when it comes to being able to deport migrants, this is one of their number one things they want to do, and then erase them. And then also the procedures that Dr. Amin did on many women, this is something that they want to push under the rug. And so we have to just connect this neoliberal free trade policy in the direct and everyday lives of women like Alma, who continue to fight and say, you know what, like, I've put so much time and effort in exposing injustices, exposing human rights violations, and yet we know you just got to follow the money, like Alma was saying, and understand really who the US government prioritizes. I think the last thing I want to say is that it is under the guise of national security that the US says neoliberal policies are good, right? But really, at the end of the day, what is happening with detention centers is those are becoming privatized. And then you're seeing the intense abuses happening under privatized detention centers. And so we just got to be really aware of how this impacts our everyday life. I just want to appreciate, again, Alma and Chris for being here. Chris is Alma's a child that we love so much, and that continue to fight every day, even without ID. They're trying to find ways to survive in this nasty ass country. So just so excited that they were able to share their experience and connect it to this overall impact on the crisis that women are facing under neoliberalism. So thank you very much, Alma. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Yeah, let's continue the fight.
Thank you so much, Angelica, and also to Tita Alma and Chris, and for your bravery and continued fight to seek justice, not only for yourself, but for all migrants who are unjustly detained and treated very inhumanely, and also for speaking out against the atrocities that were done to women, right, in detention, and it really exposing that. And so, again, we're trying to kind of link all of these different issues and struggles together. So we'll take a few minutes now to just take some questions. We're in the Q&A portion of our program. So folks, feel free to type in the chat or unmute if you have a question for any one of our speakers, including our presenters, Katie, who talked about neoliberalism, Esperanza, who shared about the current political situation as it's impacted by US imperialism, and all of our speakers, Zoe, who talked about free trade agreements, Tina on the issue of Amazon workers and seeking justice for her sister, Pushan Brown, and again, the Justice for Alma Bowman campaign and the struggle for migrants. So yeah, we'll go ahead and take a few questions if folks have any burning questions you'd like to ask. Okay, thanks, Selena. Okay, don't see any questions. That's okay. If folks don't have any questions now, you can definitely email us later and we can field the questions to the appropriate resource speaker. Okay, there's a question here by Josie, how can journalists in New Jersey connect to your work? Is this directed to Alma? Or to Iwa, sorry. Who's the question for? Yeah, you can actually contact International Women's Alliance. You can go to our website. I can share a slide later that shows where to go, internationalwomen'salliance.org. And also email us at internationalwomen'salliance@gmail.com. If you have specific questions or would like to link up with any of the issues or struggles that were shared today, we can definitely connect you and direct you to Tina, to Alma, to the Resist movement, any of these groups and organizations, we would be happy to link you to. And if you look in the chat, there's also our contact information. So please feel free to contact us. We are not actively doing any work. However, we do have contacts and connections where we do uplift the struggles of women in the Caribbean. And so we are hoping to continue building relationships with groups and organizations in that region. Part of IWA's goal and aim is to establish the IWA Americas regional chapter. Right now, we have regional chapters in Europe and in the Asia Pacific region. And part of our move towards establishing a US country chapter is so that we could start the building blocks of building an anti-imperialist women's movement under the banner of IWA, and linking up the struggles of North America, South America, and the Caribbean as one IWA America's global region. Great. Thanks, Josie. That's wonderful. We can definitely connect you. Yes. We have groups in, are you based in the, I'm doing work on my island. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, leave your contact information and we'll be in touch, or reach out to International Women's Alliance. Any other questions? Okay. So
one more question from Sarah.
Sure. Oh, yes.
How can young women get involved in work with IWA? I'm not yet 18, but want to get involved ASAP.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different ways. We have lots of different educational opportunities like this, where you can plug in. But if you're interested in doing organizing wherever you're based, give us a shout out and we'll get in touch and kind of talk through different ways and activities that can be done to organize in your local area. So we can kind of brainstorm through that. So because of the shortness of time, yes, you can send an email in the address and we will take note of it. We're going to skip the video. We had plans to show video of women kind of like having a dialogue about having more women involved in the economy and sort of talking about the role of APEC and the G7 and all of these sort of like large international high-level dialogues. We're going to skip that and go straight to our reactor, Pixie Castillo, who is representing Gabriela USA. She's the current chairperson, newly elected from the most recent Gabriela USA National Assembly, which was held in Washington, D.C. We can send a link in the video, actually, if folks want to check that out later. Pixie has been organizing and with Gabriela for a long time, almost a decade, and organizing to advance the national democratic movement of the Filipino people, and is currently based in San Francisco and is a local member of Gabriela Daly City. So please join me in welcoming Pixie Castillo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Donna. And thank you to all the speakers who were able to share different aspects of how women are impacted by neoliberalism. I'm thinking about those points on women and how women are impacted by war, how Indigenous people, Indigenous women are at the front lines of defending the land, and the violence on women through economic violence impacted by these different free trade policies. Thank you to Tina, who also spoke on the extreme exploitation for workers in Amazon that led to Pushan's death. And connecting back right off the exploitation and backs of the workers of Amazon, they're an investor. If you go to the APEC or the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, their website for their summit coming up in Seattle, upcoming in the end of July and also in November here in San Francisco, you'll see the Amazon like logo all over as they become one of the larger sponsors. And they're helping to broker these different trade deals, right? Continuously and off the backs of the workers. Alma Bowman's experience and their continued fight for justice is another example of the neglect of the US and continuing to expose the crimes of the US to further violence against women by the state, especially in the detention centers. These are just a few examples of the different ways that the state and big businesses are colluding and continue to enact economic and physical violence against women, really doing anything to hide their crimes, but continuing to grow their own profits. And I know that we weren't able to watch the video, but it was really like a clip around what's the purpose of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC forum. How is it going to help women? In particular, they talk about the care economy and how, yeah, it's such a great thing that here in the US, Biden's administration is really putting at the forefront the care economy, because that how connected that is to women. But first, the care economy is built on the blood, sweat, and tears of working class and poor women. To say that women's economic security has been a priority for the administration is there's just being self-satisfied with addressing the bare minimum for working class women. And it's not good enough. Addressing care infrastructure for the Biden administration means really little to nothing when there's clear cuts to programs that are actually supporting working class women in cities like San Francisco. And they do mention that they will be hosting the economic or APEC, their summit, as well as the 21 different like heads of state in San Francisco. They call it a privilege, but a privilege for whom to host APEC. For here in San Francisco, it's going to be the home base for the APEC Summit in November. The heads of state will be here all month. But at the same time, we're seeing drastic cuts to social services, which includes $30 million from early childcare funding to redirect to cover spending on other programs that include food security programs, which are also pivotal to working class women and their families who are living in one of the most expensive cities in the country. And yeah, one of the six largest economies here in the US. And so, yeah, just from everyone's stories and everyone sharing their experiences, these are only a few aspects of the impact that these free trade policies and things like APEC have on women. They're saying that it will advance like the economies. There's different articles saying even like how the local impact, it will revive San Francisco from the brink of an economic crisis. And that's why we have to spend the money to host it. But we know that these deals are these trade deals are lucrative for the respective countries and for their immediate needs, but are going to have a long-lasting negative impacts on the most marginalized and vulnerable in the countries. especially on working and Indigenous women and children. For places like the Philippines, we're watching President Bongbong Marcos sell out to the highest bidder at every international trip they have that they have been making in their 1 year of presidency. It's not a coincidence that they're also trying to look at the different ways that the Congress is also working in the Philippines while they're making these deals overseas. These trade agreements they're cultivated and structured really to develop super profits, right, for multinational corporations. They're using words to appeal to the general public, like sustainability, inclusion, but we have to really be discerning and understand and ask, like, sustainability and inclusion for who? Not for the women and children here in the US or in countries like the Philippines, which has been labeled a top country to invest in by these imperialist countries. They're trying to sustain businesses and inclusion for these different types of businesses. When they're talking about inclusion, they're talking about large, middle, and small businesses. They're not talking about people, right? They want to tie women, as folks were talking about in their presentations earlier, is untapped resource, right? But in the long run is not providing any stable solutions. For a majority of Filipino women are part of the informal sector of workers. And so, yeah, it's very appealing to be, being talked about, like going into tech or creating small businesses. But we know that these small businesses are only being created so that they can serve to be drawn into these different multinational corporations, to be, the small fish in the big pond that will be further eaten by these larger, like, sharks in the multinational corporations. These are really false solutions. And so as much as we speak out about these issues, we're also being repressed and attacked by the state because they are threatened by us. And so, I want to thank, like, all of the speakers as we continue to engage in our different struggles and our campaigns, because the state is really, they're continuously threatened by us. I think when Tina was speaking earlier, how many different types of police and military, right, came to the defense of Jeff Bezos in their house, right, rather than what for the people. They're using disinformation to confuse the people into thinking that these false solutions will work. But we really have to continue to fight back and clarify that these different economic policies and global trade are not for the people, but only for the multinational corporations' interests, for the different countries that are part of, like, APEC, the different imperialist countries as well, for their interests in profiteering. And we also have a Gabriela USA is working with Malaya Movement right now on a petition to help deplatform Apollo Kibuloy, who's a known sex trafficker. He's actually wanted by the FBI, but he also allows the state to utilize his different online platforms to continue to criminalize us. I've been doxxed by one of their channels before, and also have other Gabriela members and organizations have also. And so we can put a link to, thank you for sharing that. These are different ways that we can continue to work together to, not only be part of each other's campaigns, but also to help these different attacks by the state. And so, I think women hold up half the sky. So there can be no genuine equity and equality unless the entire oppressed peoples are liberated from the chains of capitalist exploitation. So really excited for us to continue to work together, especially as the International Women's Alliance, and tie all of these issues into the ongoing campaigns of women over profit, and continuing the different calls that we have as IWA. So yes, thank you to all of the speakers today and for this gathering.
Thank you so much, Pixie, for tying that all together. And thank you to all of our presenters and speakers today. So with all of this information, what can we do about it, right? We don't want to just learn about this and kind of sit idly by, but we actually want to take action. We want to fight, right? As Esperanza shared earlier, the only solution really is to stand up and fight back. Women aren't just fodder, right, for these capitalists and imperialists. Women are a force to be able to organize and make the kinds of systemic changes needed for not just our own liberation as women, but for the liberation of all of humanity under this system that completely dehumanizes and exploits and oppresses people in such a vicious way. So with that, Katie will go ahead and share some of the activities and actions that are coming up that folks can get involved with.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. So just want to share, a lot of folks have asked how to get more involved with the International Women's Alliance. We've heard some very agitating stories and sharings about people's experience, women's experiences here in the US under these neoliberal systems. And like Zoe was really pointing out, and Pixie as well, it's a year that the US is hosting APEC meetings. So they've already happened in Palm Springs, they happened in Detroit, and they're going to happen in Seattle as well as San Francisco as well. Something that we're really humbled by as IWA is that anytime APEC has met in a country that we have member organizations, they have mobilized in the thousands. So in the Philippines, they mobilized in the thousands. Last year in Thailand, I think there were about 500,000 people who took to the streets against APEC. In Chile, when they hosted in 2019, they actually shut down the APEC meetings as well. And so we really are taking seriously that APEC is being hosted here in the US, and that it's actually our turn to highlight that we understand the impacts that these meetings are having on people all over the world, right? And so there's a few ways folks can get involved with the mobilization against APEC, which is really part of the larger mobilization against neoliberalism, and really calling to show that we can actually change and oppose the systems that are causing the most harm to us globally. So the first way is July 29 to 30, we're hosting the People's Summit and Mobilization Against APEC, which will be in Seattle. It's really a lot of folks from the Northwest are going up, but any of you here, if you're based in California or even on the East Coast, we'd love to have you, and we'd love to coordinate to see how we could get you there. There's also going to be a special meeting that APEC is hosting called the Women's Economic Forum, or the WEF. That meeting will be happening on August 20th. So IWA is planning to oppose it and have a counter mobilization. If anyone here is interested in helping plan that, we would love some support. And that's one way you can get involved as well. And then again, everyone here is invited up to Seattle so we can really stand up there for women's rights. And like folks were saying throughout the presentation, like the for who, right? We have the opportunity at this to actually point out that APEC is not for the people, that these agreements that they're pushing are not for us. And we can actually demand and show what the real solutions are through those mobilizations as well. On July 13th, so coming up before these things, there will be an educational webinar on migration. That's going to be hosted by the International Migrants Alliance, and you can find info about that on pndub-pop.com. There will be a link to register and everything on there. And then November 11th to 12th is the National People's Summit and Mobilization Against APEC, so kind of going more national in scope. San Francisco will be holding the Heads of State meeting, which is presidents from all 21 member economies and leaders from all 21 member economies who will be in town. So that includes Duterte and Dina Boluarte and the Xi Jinping and all of these global leaders who are like someone in the comments said, like, we can't just uphold these like alternative economies like BRICS, like India or Brazil as like alternatives, right? Because they're also playing into the capitalist system and are selling out their people for profits. And so this is an opportunity for us to really oppose the dictatorships all over the world and oppose the US neoliberal agenda and dictatorship that we live under this fascist regime as well, to show that the people are united against these leaders globally. And then a big plug to start holding on your calendar, July 2024, we are excited to announce that the International Women's Alliance will be holding our 3rd International Assembly in Malaysia. So get your passports ready, start fundraising to go and talking with your organizations about who they are able to send, because we are really excited to have a contingent from IWA US's country chapter attend our 3rd International Assembly to take part in the discussion and decision-making of the International Women's Alliance, and to meet women's organizations from all around the world as well. So you're all invited. We're very excited and really looking forward to that. And I hope that after today, folks are really feeling that energy and the excitement to mobilize against our biggest enemy, right, the neoliberal state, and really push and create the change and create the world that we're fighting for. So thank you all, and I'll pass it back to Donna.
Yeah, thank you again so much, everyone. So looking forward to 2024. If you all are interested, start talking about fundraising now. We're at the end of our program. If you're willing to hang on for maybe 3 minutes, we'll just show a concluding video, sort of a compilation of different mass movements of women around the world, led by our different IWA organizations in Montreal, in Europe, in the Philippines, and even here in the United States. So we'll go ahead and just queue up that video. Are you able to queue that up, Katie? It's the last slide on the...
Oh, could you have it on your computer, right?
I do. Sorry, I just closed the screen. 1 second. Okay. And okay.
As women around the world take up the call to mobilize for International Working Women's Day, IWA asserts that the true solutions to advance women's economic prosperity and safety are to organize and struggle for nationalized economies and to ensure the leadership of truly independent and democratic governments.
Beautiful day to stand up for working women and say no to U.S. imperialism.
March is happening to join our voices to women around the world that celebrate on March 8th, International Working Women's Day.
We don't need more performative shows of support from either of the imperialist political parties in the U.S.
Babae ako naninindigan laban sa kahirapan at para sa pambansang soberanya. Babae ako at naninindigan ako para sa karapatan ng mga katutubo sa lupang ninuno at sariling pagpapasya.
Surviving and living in a world with corporate greed, where big corporations take advantage of the sweat and our labor to make their profits, but we still can't have a living wage. We can't feed our families, we can't have sustainable housing, and we can't build a life for ourselves and for the future and for our children.
Thank you everyone for being here, and we'll see you on the streets. Thank you so much. Take care.